On behalf of the board and staff, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's annual meeting. I'm Karen Knudsen, the operations manager for the Guild, and I'll be the moderator for tonight's meeting. I just want to remind you that we are recording the meeting and we'll make the video available later this week on WGM's YouTube channel. And if you haven't been there, that's where we also have available our 3 videos from TPT and some of our tips and tricks videos. So tonight, you'll hear from a couple of board members, both Amanda Anderson, our current president. We'll also hear from education manager Betsy Connop, and then of course, Paige is on the call for tech support. I want to thank you all for joining us and for being here tonight. Let's go through our agenda for the meeting. As a reminder, this activity is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a legislative appropriation from the State Arts Board. So in other words, thank you for supporting the arts in Minnesota. Every purchase that you made, a small portion of that goes to support organizations like us. We receive nearly $50,000 in support from the Minnesota State Arts Board every year, plus additional support from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. So I'd also like to do our land acknowledgement and note that the Weavers Guild of Minnesota is located on Dakota land. So our meeting tonight, we'll hear from the board nominees for next year's board. So we have a couple nominees that would start their board service in FY23 at the start of September, and you'll be able to vote tonight and online for the rest of the week. We've got your year in review and a financial review, and that will be with Matt and Amanda. Then we'll take a short break so I can get a drink of water and figure out what I'm doing. And then we'll hear from Betsy, who will talk about our space, and then we'll have lots of room for questions. So let's kick things off by talking about our current board. So the current officers of the board, Amanda, if you want to just unmute yourself and wave. There's too many people on the call for everyone to see you, but let's hope that works. So Amanda's on the call tonight. Thank you.
Good to see you all tonight.
Our president-elect, so Lisa is currently the president-elect and she'll be the president next fiscal year, Lisa Black.
Hi, everybody.
We've got our past president. Her term ends on August 31st, and that's Linda Serrano. She was the president 2 years ago, I guess is how you say that. It's our 3rd year of service.
Hi, everyone.
Our treasurer, Matt.
Hi there.
And you'll hear more from him later. And our secretary, Deb Jensen.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for being here, officers. The officers of the board make up the executive committee who work with staff to meet every month and help kind of guide our progress towards our strategic plan. So tonight we'll be introducing you to your board nominees. The officer position that is open in this next election is for our president-elect. So this position serves 3 years. They serve the first year as the president-elect, where they learn and get to know the role. The next year as board president, where they guide the organization. And in the 3rd year, they serve as the past president, in which they're able to share their expertise with both the incoming and the current president. The nominee that we're going to hear from is Orton Tofty. And Orton, are you on this call? I hope. One second, I'm going to check to see the chat. All right, we will pass and come back. And Orton is a relatively new member of the Guild. He is a woodworker, I can tell you that much. And he lives in the Prospect Park neighborhood. Let's see if we can get him on. Oh, Orton, great. Okay, good. Okay, perfect. Cool. You've got about 2 minutes or so.
All right, great. Okay, there's a saying in Zen Buddhism. It has to do with beginner's mind. For a beginner, all things are possible. Well, that's me. I'm probably the sort of least qualified weaver to be president-elect of the Guild, but maybe one of the more enthusiastic. My daughter Solveig is a weaver, and after college she went to Norway, studied weaving, and knowing of my kind of interest, a couple years ago gave me a kit to do band weaving. She'd taken a class at the Guild. It took another year or so for me to actually get a lesson from her, but I was sort of immediately, kind of hooked and transfixed. With her encouragement, I got a rigid heddle loom, and then this past winter I put together a floor loom, and I'm kind of in the middle of making probably every mistake possible in the weaving world. But I come to this position as a craftsperson. I made furniture I built furniture for 35, 40 years, and learning something new is exciting for all of us. But this weaving thing has been especially interesting for me because coming from the tradition of woodworking, where we're all really a bunch of gnomes in dark rooms with machinery, kind of working by ourselves. When I was kind of stumbling through all this stuff, I went into the Guild and met Betsy and Karen, and I was kind of immediately taken into this sort of big warm world of supportive. I don't know. I mean, I can't put I don't have the words for it, but it was so different for me and transfixing and kind of I don't know. It was just a great thing, and so I've been sort of fascinated by weavers and weaving, and that's the reason I applied for this position. I'm a printer. I worked in the printing trades for 35, 40 years, and I was worked in kind of big companies, and I was vice president of operations, general manager, that kind of stuff. But I was a tradesperson, really. I mean, I always was in a place where I could sort of go downstairs and the presses were running. I took care of national accounts. They were all nonprofits. I did work with PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Farm Sanctuary, Fight for the World, people like that. And we're the ones that filled your mailboxes full of junk mail. So you can thank me for that. I bring to this position. I really want to be helpful. I want to learn from you all, and I have a great respect for the gifts of others and a love of craft. And knowing the deal that I'm surrounded by women smarter than me, I have to say that I'm used to that. So you'll find me, I hope, easy to get along with everyone. I have 2 daughters, 3 granddaughters. Karen's way smarter than I am. So I'm really kind of honored to be allowed to apply for this position. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that very warm introduction of yourself. All right. So next we'll move on to the next series of nominees. So our board is made up of both the officers of the board and the at-large members. So this is our current at-large members, and we have a couple that are running for re-election, but I also wanted to note that we have a couple on this on the board who their terms will end August 31st. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to recognize those two because we're going to hear from the others in a minute. But Melba, are you on the call and you want to say hello?
Takes me too long to unmute, but hi, everybody.
That's okay. That's my own fault for putting you on the spot. Melba has been key to our outreach committee since her serving on the board, and she served on the board for 6 years. So she's finishing her 3rd 2-year term. And the other person I'd like to hear a hello from is Keith Pierce.
Hi all.
And I'm sure Keith is familiar to many of you. Keith has been a key contributor. He manages the Banditos, and one of their big jobs every year is working on the state fair ribbons. What is the update, Keith?
We're getting close to being able to assemble them. It's
Great.
exciting.
It is exciting. I hope everyone is at home working on their state fair projects. So now we'll have brief introductions from each of the at-large members who are up for nomination. So if we move to the first, we've got 3 candidates that we'll hear from tonight, and this is the order that we'll hear from them. So Linda Serrano, she is currently serving on the board and then has asked to be a nominee for re-election as an at-large member. She's done being president, though truly term limits require that she find a new position. And then of course, Neil Goman, this would be for his 2nd term, and Barb Diker, and this would be for her 2nd term as well. So we'll move on to Linda, and if you're ready, you'll go first. And I ask you, just in the interest of time, to try to keep it to 2 minutes if you can.
I think I can beat that. I can totally beat that, Karen.
Okay.
So thanks, everybody. I don't know everyone, but I've had the pleasure of meeting so many people in the last 3 years, being incoming president and past president. So as my term started to end, I was thinking, oh goodness, I feel like I'm just getting started. I am so deeply passionate about the Guild. And so Karen encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring again. Hopefully I've not overstayed my welcome. I very much want to continue the work that the board has done, the staff has done. It's just such an exciting time at the Guild. So my hope is to continue to do my part in supporting everything that the staff, the instructors, our volunteers do, so that we can continue to realize our dreams set out in the mission and our strat plan. So with that, I will say I'm so enthusiastic, and I hope I get to sit on the board for a couple more years.
Great. Thank you, Linda. And I'm going to just briefly mention that the 2 pieces were a tapestry that she's working on, and then Linda's loom set up for draw loom weaving in her studio. So if you have the pleasure of being on a call with Linda, you also sometimes get the pleasure of seeing her very well lit studio. And then the next person that would be a nominee would be Neil Goman. And unless he speaks up, I believe that Neil is not able to be on this meeting tonight due to some other family commitments. Am I right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought. But this would be for Neil's 2nd 2-year term, should he be voted in. And then the 3rd candidate that we'll hear from tonight is Barb Diker.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me to run again. I have enjoyed the 3 years on the board very much. And like Linda said, you kind of just feel like you're getting your feet on the ground. So it's lovely to be considered for another 3 years. And you can see there a piece that I did. I took a class with the Weavers Guild. I think it was like winter of 2021, about taking photos and turning them into tapestry. And so I created one of the Minnehaha Falls frozen in the wintertime using some hand spun yarn. So that's what you're looking at there, and appreciate the opportunity today.
Beautiful piece. And if you don't know, Barb also had the pleasure of having an article in hand spun for one of her pieces am I right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. And actually it was because the Weavers Guild here had pushed it out onto Instagram that spin-off picked it up and then put an article out about a jacket I had made, hand spun the yarn. Man, that was a big project. I cable yarn. Don't do that. That's a big project. I don't know what possessed me, but anyway, I made a jacket with the cabled yarn, and probably won't do that again, but it was lovely at the time.
We all have once in a lifetime projects.
Right.
That's definitely allowed. All right. Thanks to all the nominees here tonight. And I'd like to remind you that in the annual meeting notice that went out last Friday, it also has your link to vote. The online ballot is open until the weekend, so it's open until Saturday. There's also a link within that email to download a ballot and vote by hand if you'd prefer to mail it in. So thank you so much. I encourage all of our members to vote, and I look forward to sharing the results with you as soon as we're able. That's us demonstrating at Shepherd's Harvest this year because it was back. Doesn't that feel good, everyone?
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. And now I'm going to hand over the meeting to Amanda Anderson, our president.
Great. Thanks, Karen. I have the pleasure, along with Matt, in sharing our year in review, and we've decided that we want to present this to you as it relates to our commitments within the strategic plan. And just a reminder a little bit about the plan itself, our purpose is to honor our past, build upon our many strengths, and invest in innovative ways to serve our members, students, and stakeholders. And to that end, let's talk a little bit about what a strategic plan is. Well, it guides an organization, who it serves, what it does, why, and when. And I think it's important to note here that this is really done as it relates to feedback we received from you as our members, both in terms of a member survey as well as some direct interviews we did with folks, along with interviews we did with our community partners, such as those who help us in grant making. From all of that feedback and understanding kind of where we might fit within the world, we came up with 3 pillars: talent, data and technology, and financial sustainability. And all of that is wrapped together in an important view of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So let's dive in a little bit on talent, which was a core part of how we spent 22. The talent specifically was optimize our talent model to ensure stability and growth. Talent is our most valuable asset. Our staff, volunteers, board, and faculty are critical to furthering the Guild's mission and in efforts to meet our strategic goals. In supporting our talent, we ensure the long-term stability of our organization and strengthen member participation. So what did this mean in the last year? Well, it really focused on ensuring that we had the adequate staff to fulfill our mission. And how did we do it? Well, one word: Paige. So she is our engagement and administrative specialist, and her assistance in our shop provides members and visitors with the one-on-one attention while allowing us to drive key revenue. In doing that, and we can go to the next page, we've basically returned our staffing levels to 3 full-time folks, which we had been in the past, but not for quite some time. And with 3 full-time folks, we were able to do some really important things, including increase our shop and guild access. That means matching the building hours for being open from Tuesday through Thursday from 11 until 3. It also meant allowing more folks in our interest groups access to the building to use the equipment. Paige's administrative assistance has unlocked time for our other team members, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then her fresh eyes have given us a new perspective on what sorts of things we might want to offer in the shop. In addition to the talent in terms of Paige, we've also had a real commitment to our instructors. And we've looked at how we're going to build back from our pre-pandemic efforts in terms of programming. I want to focus on this summer term. In fiscal year 19, we had 31 programs that were offered. This year for summer, we're already up to 38. And for all of the summer term from fiscal year 19, we had 183 folks enroll. And while the summer term is not fully done yet, we're already at 133. Furthermore, we've added 4 new instructors. We've returned to spinning classes. We've returned to dyeing classes. In addition to those classes, we've added new classes in finishing and tapestry. So very key things in terms of talent. And while that was a key part of what we did this year, I do want to talk briefly about data and technology. Data and technology, our focus was strategy for stability, growth, and innovation. See, our challenge for our mission is to both preserve as well as advance the arts of weaving, spinning, and dyeing. And wise investments in data and technology will ensure that we continue to innovate in order to deliver relevant, accessible, and high-quality services. And this year, it was really just about focusing on improving our operations using technology. And that came down to 2 pieces of software: project management and payroll. Project management software allows us to hold people accountable throughout time. So even if the board members change or membership on committees change, we know what work needs to get done and who will be responsible for it. And then the payroll software was kind of just an extra added bonus. We were given word that our bookkeeper was leaving. And while that still was a very painful process that we're dealing with, that software has at least softened the impact ever so little. And finally, we have financial sustainability. Financial sustainability is to enable the investment of our Guild's continued growth and success. And that's really about providing a predictable and consistent revenue to support our expenses in the past year. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but the punchline is we had the largest operating support grant from the MSAB ever received by the Guild, along with thinking about new strategies for in-kind donations. And this all together deepened our connections with our members and our community and allowed us to remain in the black, if you will, during the ongoing pandemic. So I want to share a couple of details around this financial stability, starting with securing the grants. Great stories here. I'd already mentioned that the operating support from the Minnesota State Arts Board was $49,000, the largest we've ever received. Further, they gave us $22,000 for creative support. And lastly, the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council has provided $15,000, a commitment for this year, totaling $86,000 for fiscal year 2022. So on the next slide, we can talk about what that looks like in terms of our history. We've matched between this year and last year the most grants pretty much awarded in recent memory. So this really demonstrates our commitment to the communities and how the grants boards provide that commitment to us to fulfill our mission. But it doesn't end there. Let's talk a little bit about contributions, which I promised I wasn't going to cry on this call. But I am ever so amazed when I think about just how generous our member community is. When we think about contributions, we think about cash as well as sales of in-kind. And while 2021 was by far the biggest year we could have possibly have imagined, 2022 has been equally as impressive and dear to our hearts, both for cash as well as sale of in-kind. And without further ado, I'd love to hand it over to Karin to talk a little bit more about what the sales of in-kind meant for us in one very special sale in honor of Madeline Schinbach.
So Amanda wanted me to do this part of the presentation so that she wouldn't have to cry and so that I could. So let's just all enjoy this moment together. But one of the reasons we wanted to talk about the sale is because it is so important to our community in terms of how we honor our past members. And as you know, Madeline Schinbach was a longtime member of the Guild who had really invested in herself and in her weaving journey. Basically, she had walked by the windows and just said, oh, I have to do that. And she'd already been doing everything else in the world, but she just saw people on looms and said, oh, I have to do that, and threw herself into it. And when she passed a couple of years ago, she through her estate, gave her estate to the Weavers Guild in terms of her collection of yarns and her equipment. And our amazing volunteers who go above and beyond were able to step in and honor her wishes and honor her donation by holding a sale at the Guild in her honor. We raised more than $7,000, and it's actually closer to $8,000 towards programming and operations. And while people were there shopping, we also asked that they contribute a memory that we could share with their family if they would like. And so, some of the quotes on the screen are things that people had to say during the sale about what Madeline meant to them, or what the contribution meant to the Guild. So it's one of those moments where you realize how important the Guild is in terms of the function that we, are able to build relationships here. We're able to honor members and their relationship to the Guild, and we're able to give back to our community in meaningful ways by making her supplies available to future weavers. Sorry, Amanda.
Yes, thank you. And I am crying. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt to do the numbers for us. Thanks, Karin.
Thank you both. I do promise that this won't be incredibly boring, but this might allow us to then take a nice, well-needed break afterwards. We have a few financial slides to get through, and I'm apologizing. It comes through a little blurry, but I didn't realize that. But let's just go over a few things here. So what you're looking at is 2 pie charts. And these are kind of terms that we use in the finance world of sources and uses, if you're not familiar with that, or on the finance committee, or even part of these executive committee talks. But if you want to think intuitively about it, it's basically the sources of our revenue, and then where do we use those funds? So basically, the revenue sources, and this is taken from our fiscal 21 data, come from the following places. So you can see, as we just saw in the last few slides, the grants and contributions takes the cake, so to speak. Basically, that is a great amount of the Guild's funds that come in, and that can fluctuate between incredible donation years or incredible grant years, or having both happen at the same time. But when it comes to programming, the classes and tuition and fees that we do receive are basically another big chunk of our revenue. So if you think about all the financial levers that we have at the Guild, a lot of it is grant supported, a lot of it's from individual contributions or in-kind donations, but then a good size of it is from class tuition and fees. This would most likely be a quarter of the pie in a normal year. As you saw in fiscal 21, we kind of had an outstanding collections year and an outstanding grants year. And also with the pandemic going on, the class and tuition and fees typically would be at full force. But considering we had a few cancellations, and then also different formats being offered, and then capacity changes during the pandemic that was going on in fiscal 21, or that part of the pandemic, I should say, you can see that it's probably slightly lower due to that. Other sources that we do have are from the fiber source. So the shop in the store, and this is in sales, and it's net sales. So we take the cost of that inventory and net that together with the money that we receive for it. And then you can also see that we have memberships and the percentages for that amount of revenue that we receive. So again, this comes from the fiscal 21 IRS Form 990, if you want to get really nerdy like I do. And basically, this is the percentages of all the different sources of revenue. So where do we spend it? Well, you can see we spend most of our funds on programming. So programming is the bread and butter of the Guild. It's basically what we do. It's the classes that we offer. And it's basically that in a nutshell of what we spend our funds on. So grants help subsidize that. It's also going to the staff that devote the time to these programming services as well, and then also any of the instructors that are included in there. And then there's 3 different kind of expenses in the eyes of a not-for-profit. So we also have membership and fundraising that we do spend our funds on as well. So I can go to the next slide and kind of show you just the ebb and flow of the Guild since the pandemic started, what a normal year looked like, what we did incredibly in fiscal 21, and then how we're currently performing. So as you can see, there are 2 lines here. The purple one is basically revenue. So that's the income coming into the Guild. And then we have expenses, which would be that red line. So typically a not-for-profit, as you probably would know, is we don't get profit, right? So we're kind of running at usually a break even. We like to use the funds that we receive for a specific purpose. And if they're not used, then they're usually earmarked for another purpose in the following year or developed through some strategic planning efforts down the way. So in fiscal 19, I think it was within $800 that our entire funds received and expenses incurred ended up pretty much right, in line with one another. And then you can see that it's around $300,000. So a little bit above that. And I would call that mostly a typical year. So the Guild, when I first started as treasurer, I looked and saw our operating budget was roughly around $280,000 to $320,000 for the past couple of years. And that seemed to be pretty normal. Then obviously an abnormal year happened, fiscal 20, and you can see that, both revenue and expenses did dip. Now you see that expenses didn't dip entirely because we have a lot of fixed expenses. We have staff that are salary based. We have occupancy. We pay, an annual lease. But a lot of that other type of expenses are pretty much tethered to, programming. So if we don't offer a class, we don't have an expense for a class, and so on. Or if we don't sell a product, we don't, get income for a product, and we don't have the expense for that as well. So there are certain things that did go down with our operating expenses back in fiscal year 20. Then fiscal year 21 happened. There are a lot of things that happened during this year, which I'd like to just remark on. You've already noticed we had an extraordinary year of contributions. We had higher than normal grants since we've first, I think that was a 10-year outlook, and it was roughly 2015, but that might have been even a fluke year at that time, but the highest grants that we've ever received. And then we also got a Paycheck Protection Program 2 times. We received funds from the state business association, or small business association, from the federal government. And that really helped us sustain, our growth. It sustained retention for staff, and it was allowed to go towards programming and occupancy costs and what have you. Our courses were still starting to ramp up. As you can see, the expenses kind of didn't go back to that fiscal 19 level, but that allowed us to have a nice sizable reserve at the end of the fiscal year. Fiscal year is kind of an arbitrary line in the sand, right? It's a calendar year, typically, when you're doing your own taxes. Ours ends on August 31st. So we did end the year in fiscal 21 with a $77,000 net income. So that was actually all get right into the bank account, where we can go almost to the next slide in a second, and I'll show you that how our bank account has also grown, and which has allowed us then to kind of take a step back, develop a nice strategic plan, go over a 5-year, 3-year outlooks, and then, focus on real tangible items that we can kind of invest in for our future. Not just talking about like marketable securities or the horrible, Coinbase that's going on right now. I'm not sure if you watch the market today, but oh my gosh. Those types of investments are fine and good, but these are kind of investments like you can invest in staff or space or, growth of any other kind, like technology or, different types of platforms we might offer and so on. So there's a lot of different opportunities that come along with having a nice sizable year that we did in the previous one. Currently, we're through 9 months, and I took a sneak peek at the financials. There's probably some finance committee people on the phone or the Zoom call here, but I didn't send them the financials yet. But you can take a snapshot here, and Amanda might be surprised as well. But we're currently running our with a $40,000 net income through the end of May. So we're actually doing very well, and we're surpassing our budgeted expectations at this point in time. So for lack of a better statement, the state of the guild is strong, and we're definitely in a good place, and we definitely persevered during some very, very uncertain times, especially when we were looking at an outlook 2 years ago and last year. And the next slide is basically going to show you just 2 things that I really like to point out. Purple line is current assets. So what is that? That's basically our cash in the bank and then our inventory that we have on hand. It's basically a majority just solid cash on hand that the guild has. And then there's a red line that shows our liabilities or our bills to be paid. So we are far and away in a great place that we can meet short-term obligations and then also be able to be sustainable for well over the not-for-profit standard, which is 180 days of cash on hand. And basically, the not-for-profit standard says we should be between 6 months and 3 years, and we're closer to the 2-year mark in that regard. So I just wanted to point that out that, even though we ended the year with a net income, it's not in this funny accounting way. It's actually true cash, and it's displayed right here. And you can see what our cash balance was back in fiscal 19, and then also how it's performing as of the May 31st through fiscal 22. I will be around for questions. If there are any, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'm also going to inform you that I believe if you're going to be still awake at this point in time, I think we're going to take a short break.
Indeed. I'll wake everyone up and just first mention we are going to take a 10-minute break right now. So let me check my phone. So it's 7:10. We will start again at 7:20. And we welcome you back then. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the picture of that little lamb, I remember from another presentation, and it is just about the most joyful image I can imagine.
Amanda, that's why we have to reuse it.
I know, thank you.
Doesn't he just make you want to like frolic
Totally.
in some
totally.
grass and then come back to a very important meeting within 10 minutes?
Yes.
Or go blow your nose and wash your face?
I know.
Whatever it
Yeah.
takes, team. Whatever it takes.
Exactly. Well, and I did just take a promenade around the garden where we're going to be planting dye plants, but my family is working on fencing it in right now. So it's super hot out. They're working hard. I lounge like out there just frolicking for a moment and I'm like, oh, I'll leave you to it. I'll go back inside.
Let me know when you're done out here.
Exactly.
I'll give you my orders.
Yes.
All right. Welcome back to the meeting, everyone. So for the next part, I'm going to be introducing Betsy Conup, our education manager, and she'll be presenting for about 30-ish minutes, I think, on the issues of space. And we all know that this is a really important topic, so I'd remind you to please write down your questions as they come to you. And if they aren't addressed in the presentation, you feel free to enter them into the chat. You know, for clarity, we're going to try to make sure that we hear from a lot of different voices. So, you know, make them very specific. And then at the end of Betsy's presentation, I'll be helping to moderate the questions and get them to the person who can best answer them. So welcome, Betsy, and I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karin. And hello, so many familiar faces. I'm so glad we had such a good turnout. So yeah, thank you for gathering to hear about our year last year. As you know, the last couple of years have been really tough in so many ways. And, you know, our members have really inspired us to put in the effort, extra hours, extra time, tears, to really rise to the challenge that COVID presented to us. Our instructors have really stepped up, as we know. We've had an amazing board, amazing leaders in our interest groups. So I just wanted to take a minute and, you know, in response to the fantastic slides that Matt and Amanda presented, to say thank you. You really drive us to do what we do. This is a special place, as Orton mentioned, and you are the fuel in our tank. So I'm here to share about a very unique opportunity that would allow WGM to address member feedback, increase our programming, and improve access, both physically to a WGM space, as well as in terms of ADA accessibility, or the things that we think about when we hear the term ADA accessibility. This is big, and in the words of one of our board members, it is both challenging and very promising. So your presence here shows your investment, and I hope that you can listen with open ears, mind, and heart. I know that our current space at the Textile Center means a lot to us. We have a long history there. So this is not easy to consider. But throughout the presentation, you know, I invite you to hold your trust in Karin, myself, and your board to be good stewards of the Guild, its resources, and its future in the front of your mind. Along with you, we cherish this community, and we all really want to see it thrive. And because we have limited time together tonight, I won't be able to share everything that I would like with you. So, but please know that this presentation, we're seeing it as a starting point for you all, but there's a lot of thoughtful, considered work behind us that has gotten us to this point. And we're very excited to be able to be at a point where we can share it with you all. Tonight, I'll start the conversation by reflecting on our current space and your feedback, share how the proposal came about, present a vision of the open book space, and offer a consideration of how it aligns with the needs and goals of our community as expressed through surveys, in-person feedback, and interviews, most recently through the strategic planning process. And as part of our proposal to open book, we have requested to schedule a time so that all of you, our community, our members, can drop in to see the space and ask further questions. Sometimes it can be really hard to envision something if you can't experience it in a tangible way. So we know that that's a very important part, and we want your thoughts, your reflections after you've had a chance to visit the space, as well as tonight. So please know we'll continue to make other opportunities for you to learn more, reflect, and share your thoughts. So to start, I want to acknowledge that the Textile Center was founded in 1996 by 4 Guild members, with the idea of having one space that all guilds of Minnesota could use as a central meeting spot. What a brilliant idea. They wanted a place for sharing and accessing our collective resources, which is still in existence today, thanks to Nancy Momby, who's on this call. She is the guardian and champion of the Textile Center's library. And they wanted a space where all guilds could thrive. Our members laid the floor, they built the walls, they established the beds for the dye garden. I'm talking about you, Paula Paff, who I know is on this call. They raised funds and they raised friends. Since becoming an anchor tenant in 2001, we've continued to represent the Textile Center's founding intention as a home for textile guilds of Minnesota. The space has allowed us to grow and professionalize. We've seen a dramatic increase in membership and programming. We received generous grants and member support, as Amanda highlighted. Our programming has grown, and we now have professional staff, 3 of us. As a result, our guild and its activities look very different than it did in 2000 when we first moved in. Last summer, as part of our strategic planning process, we sent a survey to our members, you all, and asked, how could our space better serve the Guild community? We had received a lot of feedback anecdotally, and we had received feedback in the past related to our space. And we wanted to check in with you all as part of the strategic planning process to assess where we were today. 3 clear responses emerged. You wanted room to learn in our programs, i.e. less crowded classrooms, increased access, so better accommodations for those with access needs, as well as more open hours, informal gathering space. We know how important getting together outside of paid programming is for you all. We hear that. You can see some of your responses to the question that we asked here. In reflecting on your replies, our executive committee recognized that our current space was not serving our community's need. Those of you who have visited recently know that we have struggled to accommodate what we're currently doing. As you can see here, members who want to work on interest group projects are crammed into corners and hemmed in by classroom equipment and donated goods. Students and instructors are cramped in their classrooms, or it takes staff up to 2 hours per class to move looms and other equipment to adjust the space so that it feels less cramped. Our staff are crammed into shop storage. Recently, equipment fell on a staff member, giving them a concussion. Our space in the Textile Center building are in need of major building improvements, which we will likely pay for through an assessment or a significant increase in rent. These include addressing our subfloor issues. Currently, the subfloor is coming up, and in one of our classrooms, it's difficult to open the door all the way. The subfloor is starting to create a tripping hazard in one of our classrooms because it's coming up. We also are looking to Textile Center, who has said that they need to replace the roof and HVAC system soon. The demand and the desire to grow our programs and our membership is here, but it's increasingly difficult to do so in our current location. What a wonderful problem to have. We are too big for our britches. Acknowledging that the availability of commercial space in the Twin Cities as a result of COVID, the executive committee began to explore other options and evaluate costs a couple of years ago. This included the cost per square foot, utilities, build out, and real estate taxes. They consulted a commercial real estate broker to get an understanding of the current market and to set their expectations. After months of exploration and conversation, the executive committee concluded that a larger footprint was beyond our financial capacity. They also recognized that spaces overwhelmingly lack the amenities that we currently have, including parking and light rail access. So sometimes the door that you've been looking for needs other doors to close before you can see it. Shortly after the executive committee set aside consideration of a larger space, WGM staff crossed paths with Bethany Whitehead, our former grant liaison at the Metropolitan Regional Grants Council. Now, Bethany is the general manager of Open Book. She was an incredible support to us during our time in MREC. We know her as a champion for the arts in the Twin Cities, and especially for smaller arts organizations and artists. In talking with Bethany recently about our comeback from COVID, we mentioned the issues with our current space. Bethany volunteered that a space was available at Open Book and invited us casually, no pressure, to come and take a look. I'm excited to share with you what we learned and what we saw. As we move through the slides, please keep in mind our community's feedback. We want accessible space to learn and to gather. So a bit about Open Book's location. Many of you, I assume, have been there because it houses some fabulous organizations and it's a lovely building. It's located near the Guthrie Theater and also the Mill City Museum and Gold Medal Park, which are 3 wonderful destinations within the Twin Cities. Imagine a Saturday where you can walk along the river, stop in at the Weavers Guild, and then grab lunch at the Mill City Farmers Market. That sounds like a pretty great morning to me. Similar to our current location, it's located in a part of downtown that is quite accessible. Often on-ramps to I-35 and I-94 blocks away. It's in close proximity to bike trails, both on-street and off-street, and both the blue and green lines are nearby. I recently took the river road from Textile Center to Open Book. It took me 11 minutes and it was lovely all the way. So Open Book, like the Textile Center, was founded by a collection of organizations as a haven for those interested in literary arts. The building opened 20 years ago a seamless renovation of 3 historic properties, and it's part of the fabric of the best part of downtown Minneapolis. Its founders include Minnesota Center for the Book Arts, Milkweed Publishing, and Loft Literary. It still houses these organizations as well as other tenants. Open Book operates solely as a building manager and landlord, so it can be responsive to tenant needs. And yes, there is a parking lot right next to the building with front and rear entrances. There are 32 spots, and if we moved in, 3 would be dedicated to the Weavers Guild, so we can think about them in flexible ways, such as load in or load out if somebody has equipment or if they're picking up equipment. There's also on-street parking and ramps nearby. Staff, the executive committee, and a group of key instructors toured the space last month. In visiting the site, we were excited about the many amenities offered by the space, including a cafe, gathering space on all levels, and the synergy that comes with being among other arts organizations. Open Book is designed not just to meet ADA standards, but to meet accessibility best practices. And let me tell you, there is a gap there. The parking lot is evenly graded with designated accessible spots at the front and rear entrances. Both entrances have push button automatic doors. We know that that's a benefit to those carrying equipment into and out of the building. Internal spaces can comfortably accommodate two-way traffic. So if we have a spinner coming in carrying a spinning wheel and a rigid heddle weaver exiting with their class kit, both can comfortably pass each other in the spaces. A freight size elevator has access to every floor, including the lower level. Amenities that we currently have that we would continue to have access to are exhibition and storage space. Unlike our current situation, our storage space would be climate controlled and safe for staff to access. The building is open 64 hours a week. Compare that to Textile Center's 24 hours a week. Here are photographs of the space as it is. You can see large windows that let in a lot of natural light. These windows open, which offer fresh air ventilation. There's a modern kitchenette in the space, and the space is very flexible. As you can see, it's very open. Here's another view of the space with one of our instructors over here and a member of our executive committee for scale. And here is a video of the space. You can see the kitchenette, an open space, a bank of offices in the back, some windows, and then a couple smaller spaces that are closed off, including this one that you see behind the play button, which is the largest space in the room. So, playing around with layouts, we came up with what you see here. The space offers an additional 600 square feet. This potential layout was designed in response to the member feedback we received during this strategic planning process. We would like to utilize the extra space to enlarge the footprint of our shop. Currently, our shop is under 200 square feet for sales items. This potential offers 450 square feet. Imagine what we could offer in that space. We would be able to create dedicated storage space to shop inventory, including donated goods. And we would also have dedicated storage space to class equipment that's not currently being used or in use for a current class. Additionally, we would be able to offer a dedicated space for members to utilize equipment for shared interest group projects on our large looms, access drum carters, and use the fancier wheels and e-spinners that we have without having to navigate our class schedule. So you see the big shop space here and the storage for the shop here, a classroom space for our rug weavers. You can see a spinning cabinet here, as well as wheels here and drum carters here, so that our spinners are integrated into the guild space. They're not segregated, they're part of our community and represented as such. We have our interest group looms here. We have a gathering space for members. Our intention would be to install a sound deadening curtain here so that we can utilize space as a classroom space here when needed, and then open it up as shared space. So we would have flexibility based on our programming needs and based on our members' needs. We would remove 3 of the offices in the bank of offices that you saw. We would dedicate space for education equipment storage or class equipment storage. And then we have 3 flexible offices, which we could use for staff. We could also use for member meetings, for folks to eat lunch who don't feel comfortable eating lunch in a group because of COVID. As you read in the annual meeting announcement, the board unanimously approved moving forward with submitting a proposal to open book last Monday. In light of our previous space explorations, staff and the executive committee recognized this as a unique opportunity, offering additional space, increased building access, and improved amenities when compared to our current space. After careful consideration and assessment of our capacity and financial position, the executive committee brought the opportunity to the finance committee for feedback before presenting it to the board. We are on a bit of a compressed timeline as another group has submitted a proposal to lease the space. In a more ideal situation, our timeline and communications with you would have looked differently, but we wanted to be sure we could be considered for this unique opportunity. This opportunity will provide our community with additional space and increased accessibility to meet our current needs. And it does so without forcing us over our skis, as one of our board members said. It is incremental growth with manageable risk. All right, so some big questions that have come up. What about our library and Textile Center library access? The library is a place where we see the founding intention of the Textile Center, a repository of collective resources accessible to members of all contributing guilds and the public. It feels right to maintain a connection to the Textile Center, and our members say that access to Textile Center library is an important benefit of their guild membership. We want to recognize and maintain this. Should we move to open book, our resources would continue to be part of the Textile Center library, and members would maintain borrowing privileges. That said, the WGM reference volumes that are currently housed in our classrooms would come with us to our new space. We would also have a collection of high demand titles on hand for circulation at the new location. Thus, we would expand access to resources that are most in demand, as they would be available at both Textile Center and our new site. How much will this cost, and how does it compare to what we are paying now? In our proposal, we've requested an initial lease rate of $22 per square foot, which is what we will be paying at Textile Center starting September 1st. The board has also approved a renovation budget not to exceed $70,000. We plan to fundraise through a capital campaign, as well as utilize a portion of our reserves, which Matt highlighted a few slides back. And our reserves, as you noticed, would currently cover almost 2 years of expenses. So we do have space in our reserves to fund the full $70,000 if we need it. What about parking and access? So as I mentioned, Open Book has 32 spaces in a lot next to their building. And there are 3 total spaces, accessible spaces, near the front and the rear entrances of the building. We would have 3 dedicated spots in addition, which we could use for load in and load out, for instructors, for folks who we know are coming in to pick something up really quickly, and we don't want them to have to search around for parking. It's up to us how we would utilize them. There are also many on-street parking spots and 2 ramps nearby with daily rates of no more than $10. When I visited Open Book on the weekend and during the week, I've always been able to snag a spot. I know that my experience isn't everyone's experience, but I can assure you I haven't had issues with parking personally. And in terms of access, I covered ADA accessibility, that they really designed the space with best practices in mind. So it's over and above what ADA requirements are. And in terms of just accessing the building, they're open 64 hours a week. And I would also invite you to think about our desire for gathering spaces. There are beautiful spaces to get together on every single floor. On the first floor, there's a cafe space with lots of tables. On the second floor, there's a beautiful atrium space with comfortable lounge chairs and coffee tables. On the third floor space, there's an outdoor patio. And let me tell you, it is stunning. So have way more to share with you. So many more details I could give you, but in the interest of time, I think it's best to allow space for questions. So I'm going to let Karin take the lead. And again, I invite everybody to put their questions into the chat.
Yeah, and Betsy, we've had a couple come in already. So let's talk about a dye lab or a dye classes.
Yeah. So at the Textile Center, we know that there's a dye lab and we know that WGM has utilized it in the past. Unfortunately, the rates for us to rent the dye lab mean that we have to offer classes at a higher rate than Textile Center does, which makes it difficult for us to be competitive with Textile Center's classes. It's also hard to access the dye lab based on their schedule. We don't have ideal times where we can get in. And then, as you know, for the last 2 years, it hasn't been accessible because of COVID. The access has reopened, but the rates have gone up, making it even more prohibitive. So given that, over the last few years since I've been here, we've looked at other models. So we've experimented with a few different things, including offering natural dye classes in one of our classrooms using hot plates. We've offered a natural dye class, courtesy of Maddie Barch, in a nearby dye garden. She used a turkey fryer to create a dye pot, and it worked beautifully. It allowed us to be outside on a beautiful summer day and to be next to the plants that we were utilizing for our projects. Kayla Exworthy, who's on this call, and I have also put our heads together, and we are going to offer some classes in her studio space at the Northrop King building. So moving forward, I know a dye lab wasn't represented on the floor plan that you saw. However, we can continue experimenting in the ways that we already have that have been successful. We've also talked to Open Book and in our proposal asked for use of the Minnesota Center for Book Arts printmaking studio. The floors are non-slip, they have drains in the floor, and they have sinks, big sinks, utility sinks. The one thing we would need to explore is ventilation. And should we move into the open book space and we decide that this is a place where we want to be long-term, we can work with Open Book on larger investments for ventilation. But in the meantime, that doesn't stop us from offering dye classes in other spaces and exploring what we can do in the space as it currently is. And I would argue that all of those things are better than what we have now at the Textile Center.
Betsy, could you enable closed captioning? I think as a host, you're the only one with that capability.
Yes.
And while Betsy does that, I'm going to jump in and take one of the questions from the chat. So one of the questions is there space for monthly member meetings? I'm going to take this as our member support person and out of excitement. So within the larger open book space, there is a performance hall on the second floor that has, I don't know if you've ever been there for a poetry reading or a book reading or something like that, but it's a space that would actually be below the space that we're talking about. And it would have the capacity for us to have a mic set up, be able to rearrange the chairs however we would like, and be able to hold a meeting. One of the exciting things about it, for me personally, is just it is a big, giant room. And that feels good in terms of being able to get in. I can imagine setting up tables where people might set down their items that they want to, bring for show and tell. And that feels really nice. And the rental rates are very affordable. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's $10 an hour. So in addition, for smaller meetings, Open Book also has other rooms within the building that are a little bit smaller, that are set up more for classroom style. And so depending on their availability, we'd also be able to rent smaller rooms if we thought that it would be, a gathering of a smaller group. So I'm imagining some of our larger interest groups would want to meet there if they didn't feel comfortable meeting in one of the gathering spaces on the other floors, because there are gathering spaces on every floor. Betsy, you're back on though. So let's talk about thinking about events at the stadium and thinking about parking. Have we thought about how we might manage that?
Yeah. So we have that problem now with the Gopher Stadium nearby. We got a break from COVID, but before COVID, parking was an issue in the neighborhood. As we know, the Textile Center lots are small, and on a Saturday when both the Weavers Guild and Textile Center were offering classes, we had to schedule our classes early before the game started so that folks could find parking in our lot. And if they couldn't find parking in our lot, they could find it on the street. So if we think about open book space, we have US Bank Stadium nearby. Large events mostly happen in the evening. So concerts are happening in the evening. Thursday night football games are happening in the evening, but there are a handful of football games that are happening on Sundays. The Center for Book Arts has it's their lot, it's private. They don't sell spots during games to make extra money. So we wouldn't be competing with regular visitors to the open book space on Sundays when there are Vikings games. And I'm sorry, as a Green Bay girl, I almost said Packers there. So, I'm feeling okay about competing for parking spaces during Vikings games, because there aren't that many that happen on Sunday in a full year. I think that it results to about 6 Sundays in a full year. We can program around them. We don't currently program every Sunday. And we can also lean on the fact that Open Book doesn't sell their parking spots on game days. So we would have access to their lot. And again, that lot has 32 spots, which is above and beyond the capacity of any class that we would offer on a Sunday. And we also have 3 dedicated spots in addition to that.
I'm gonna send this next question over to Amanda. Amanda had done some of the initial conversations with our commercial real estate expert, who was actually referred by someone within the guild. And Amanda, can you talk a little bit about how the rates and the amenities at Open Book might compare with other sites, either other sites you've seen or other sites you kind of looked at online or that he talked about?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things going into analysis last year was this idea that there's a surplus of commercial property available for rent or for purchase. And indeed there is, a pretty decent amount out there. But what I learned through working with the commercial broker is that the taxes are a lot higher. Property taxes are a lot higher now than they were pre-pandemic, because the city of Minneapolis and surrounding communities have needed to recoup lost revenue from sales tax. So fewer people buying lunches or doing other things in the city have resulted in offsets on the property side. So what makes the Center of Book Arts and Open Book more attractive than other properties is that they're a nonprofit. So they have a different property tax status than some of the other spaces, like ones in kind of like the Northrop King or Northeast Arts District, which became very attractive to us. There was another question in the chat regarding the build out and how we came to that pricing. The $70,000 was a bid that I got last year to build out a space just down the road from our current location. So I knew I had fairly recent pricing, and then we did validate that with a construction company that partners with Open Book to see if we were still in the ballpark. And the answer is yes. So that comes with 2 data points to say that that is the maximum that we would expect to pay to build out the space. One caveat, we don't have to spend it all. So, there's things that we would like to do. We don't have to do all of them. We could get into the space for less money if we choose.
Thank you, Amanda. Betsy, I'm going to direct this next one to you. And it's it's probably more of a comment than a question, but it has to do with having a dedicated spinning room. So prior to COVID, we had our classrooms kind of dedicated in a way where there was a specific spinning area, and that way someone could walk in and access the supplies kind of in a general location. Under this proposed setup, can you tell me a little bit more how that would work? The concern is that in this new setup, things would be scattered and it would be harder and harder to meet there and meet for activities.
Oh, yeah, no, I feel completely oppositely about that. I think from what I've heard and what I've seen, our spinners have felt segregated, that they don't get as much real estate, they don't get as much attention, they don't have as many class options. And so that's been, I think, a personal passion of mine, is to really think about, okay, how do we make this better? And so one thing that we've done is we've looked at classes. We found a really awesome instructor, Riley Cleve, who recently had an article published in Spinoff, and they're very young, so that's really impressive. So we've added a number of advanced beginning to intermediate spinning classes. One of our spinning interest group members, Beth Friedman, who's probably one of the most astounding spinners in the guild, has begun developing and offering classes, including a very popular blending board class. So that's one way in which we're recognizing. And in those classes, we found that, especially given the social distancing needs now, because of COVID, our spinning classroom is really cramped. And our other classrooms are also really cramped because we have so much equipment dedicated to weaving. Even with the looms folded up and pushed in the back and the spinners moved into our existing spaces, it's pretty cramped. So the wonderful thing about the space that we're looking at is its flexibility. There's space where we can move our equipment out of the way when it's not in use, so that folks can really spread out and take up space. Right? So if we have a Whirling Spinsters interest group meeting and we have 16 people, they can really make the space their own. They have the room to spread out. And in terms of equipment being in proximity, there's not just one way to set it up. Like I mentioned, the space is really flexible. We've thought about how we could set it up initially, but that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. It is flexible space. And so right now the carders are close to the wheels. They're close to the other spinning equipment. So it's maybe 10 paces. It's not that far. And it's also designed so that our spinners and weavers, or folks who are working on spinning and weaving on site, can be better integrated. We started some experiments where we moved one of our interest group looms into the existing spinning room. We've had rug interest group members weaving in that space every single week since we've done that. We've also had newer spinners coming in to utilize our drum carders, and it's been really fantastic having the integration of both weavers and spinners. Folks have made new friends that they wouldn't have been able to make otherwise. Because of our model, it segregates weavers and spinners. But having some common areas where folks can blend and meet one another has been really exciting. It's been really wonderful to see. And I think both our weavers and our spinners have benefited from that. And I see some folks on this call who have been those people engaging with others. So that's my response to the comment. I have taken the comments that our spinners have made to heart and have looked at the space through that lens.
While we're thinking about gathering together, we know we're not done with COVID. So let's talk a little bit about what Open Book has done in terms of their COVID awareness or their HVAC system or some of those kind of upgrades that we also know so much about now that used to be a thing of the past. Yeah. Betsy, do you want to talk about that a little bit? I think the HVAC part.
Yeah, that was a question that we raised with Open Book, and they've renovated their HVAC systems. I think they have 11, and if I remember right, they replaced 9 and are in the process of replacing the remaining 2. They've also put in-room HEPA filters into the spaces. So the 3 main organizations, one of their tenants, and then the common, like the meeting room and the performance hall that are there, all have filtration systems. And they've said that if we were interested in investing in a filtration system as well, we could do that. And it would be dedicated to our space and sized to the square footage and capacity of our space. And they estimated the cost would be around $600 to $800. So that's something that we would consider and most likely invest in. Another thing that was really exciting was that there are windows that open in the space, so we can also control some of the ventilation while they're permitting. And then there's also a patio space on the same floor as the space where we're meeting, and it's very large. So we could have folks that wanted to get together, whether it be for an interest group or just a group of students after a class that wanted to hang out more. There's an outdoor space where they could take off their masks, get together, and the breeze would be blowing, and we could rely on nature's ventilation.
Not what I was prepared to hear tonight, but yes,
Ventilation.
I will be thinking of wind as nature's ventilation for the rest of the week at least.
Exactly.
Guys, obviously I'm managing the chat and like looking through all these. So if I skip over one, please do not be offended. But one of the questions is about, a little more specifics about the terms of the lease and if there's any consideration or concern that rental rates might dramatically increase downtown based on kind of pre-COVID moves of businesses or post-COVID moves of what they're going to do. The question was much more graceful than that. And Amanda, I'm thinking you are unmuted, so I'm thinking you will take this question.
I will, thank you. Yes, so our proposal, again, nothing's a done deal, but what we proposed to them was a 3-year lease so that we can lock in on favorable rates. There is a built-in, let's call it a cost of living or inflation index of just 3%. So that gives us a lot more comfort and clarity and understanding what our finances would look like. I'm also, based on the way other expenses have gone in the building and prior experience is no determination of future outcomes. But with that said, the fact that they're offering us all the tenants very reasonable rates for the rental of their other spaces, like $5 an hour for meeting rooms, it tells me that they're not looking to make a profit here. They're just looking to cover their expenses. And because it's a nonprofit, we're expecting that the expenses will remain at a reasonable level, unlike other areas maybe in the neighborhood.
I'm just going to throw out a couple just where they're comments and they're not necessarily questions, which is, sorry, I had them ready, which is the belief that the parking at this new place is far worse than what we have now because I know it well. Someone mentioning that there are 9 in-town Vikings games this year. So, which sounds familiar when we think about the university's parking situation. And a question about, what other spaces we've explored and have we looked at the creative enterprise zone specifically, as well as, the concern that we're making a decision after looking at only one space. Amanda, do you feel comfortable taking that conversation?
So I do apologize. I was responding to a question. Can you repeat it, Karen? I'm so sorry.
Wow, no. But yes, I can. Okay. Where was my brain a minute ago? My brain was saying, so in terms of thinking about looking at a new space, there's a concern about making any sort of decision after looking, specifically at this one place in depth and wanting to know if the Guild is available, is familiar with the creative enterprise zone or other buildings that are available, other available locations along University. I mean,
Yes.
I think the question really comes down to, why look at this one if there are others out there?
Yep, understood. And the irony was that was the direct message I was responding to at the moment. So yes, I know very little about it, but I have made a commitment to research it. I will say that I did look at multiple properties along University Avenue from where we are now all the way to Can Wonderland. So I understand in a pretty decent way what the capabilities and opportunities are in that, but it has been focused primarily on for-profit enterprises that pay property taxes. So the piece that I need to research is what, grants might be available to lower the cost for a nonprofit.
And I think one thing that, it's really hard for me to imagine, right? But we don't have all the answers to every single idea we've ever had, So I guess I just am reminding myself and everyone else that, like, yeah, just to keep that in mind. I'm going to give you a couple more comments from the chat that were more comments rather than questions. I strongly support pursuing this opportunity for a variety of reasons. There's a couple here about parking that is different from what we've heard before, which is, I used to work a couple blocks from Open Book and often visited their coffee shop, which is on the first floor. Parking was always available in the lot and it's paved. Another person saying, I've taken lots of classes at MCVA2 and I haven't had trouble parking. So I think, as we know, parking is a big question for our community, and we knew that there would be lots and lots of questions, which is really important when we think about how people are going to bring their items into the guild. Another question I don't think a comment that we haven't touched on is, I believe we are faced with the question of when will we need to make a move, not if, especially given what we found during light rail construction.
Would you mind if I address that?
Yeah, you can, because I don't think I know enough to know exactly what that means. Kathy, Mayor, please unmute yourself and explain.
I think I'm off mute.
Yep.
I was on the board at the time that light rail was coming through our area. And at that time, we, along with the Textile Center, made a concerted effort to find different space. We knew that it would be at least a couple of years of disruption for us. And both the Textile Center and the Weavers Guild had other additional things that we knew our current space was not serving at that point in time. And I know over the last 80 plus years of the Guild, we've moved a number of times. And we've been in this space for over 20 years now. And it's been a marvelous space for us, an incredible, incredible improvement. But we knew at the time we were going to need to move. And long term, our position on the board was that we expected a lot of growth in building along light rail, and that the real estate would become much more valuable than the building itself. I still personally believe that to be true. We looked at a number of locations, we found one, and eventually it fell through. So we took the move of saying, all right, we at least have to move the Fiber Fair event off to Northrop King. We need better space for that event. We knew we needed additional retail space at that time. We knew we needed additional classroom and workspace at that time. So I would encourage everybody to say, let's look at this as a great next move. Let's not stop and let's say, can we get 80% of the way there? It would be a huge improvement. And not to dismiss this out of hand. It's something that has some time constraints to it, would answer many of the demands that we have had and listed in the past. And I thank the board for moving with some alacrity on this opportunity that's sort of fallen into our laps. But please understand that this is not the first time we have visited this question from this location as a board.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, I think for me personally, coming in at the Guild, one of the ways I got to know our members was by receiving member feedback. And our members are very passionate about our space and how we use it, what they wish it could be, what they want it to be. And I have no doubt that this has come up many, many times in the past. So I appreciate knowing that kind of the journey of how we've explored other moves. In fact, one of the comments says, you know, when I was on the board, this exact issue came up, but it was a different location in downtown St. Paul. At that time, this would be, I think it was 2017. She says that it just didn't fly. Okay, I want to make sure that I'm hearing all the voices because I want to make sure that the feedback is recognized. So some of the other comments that people have just put in the chat have to do with, well, it sounds wonderful, so thank you. Being connected to a nonprofit is huge. Betsy, do you want to say a little bit more about that relationship?
Yeah.
Or just what that would mean?
Yeah,
For those
yeah.
who, you know, who might want to know a little bit more about kind of what we're talking about when we say that we would be in open book.
Yeah, yeah. So I think one of the things that we really cherish about being in Textile Center is that we're in community with like-minded artists. And I believe the same is true for the open book space. Right when you walk in, there's the Minnesota Center for Book Arts, and similar to the Textile Center, they have an incredible gallery space where they're representing the work of current artists, both regionally, nationally, and internationally. They have a fantastic gift shop where they sell items made by their members as well as supplies. And I think that resonates with us because we do the same mostly, although we don't currently have items made by our members, but we have supplies. And, you know, you go up to the next floor and there's the Loft Literary Center, and there's a writing studio there. So again, artists actively practicing their craft right there. And then you go up the next floor and there's Milkweed Publishing's office. And, you know, they published a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which I know a lot of our members are familiar with. You know, the ethic of what they're publishing is in line with a lot of the things that our members are interested in. So how do we make how do we make our practices more sustainable? How do we better represent and engage with a broader range of folks who are practicing our craft? You know, they're approaching what they publish with a similar ethic. And they also have a fantastic bookstore on the first floor that is incredibly curated. Any book you pull off the shelf is worth reading. So just being around those organizations who are occupying the space with an ethic that's really similar to ours, as well as their communities. I mean, when we think about people who are practicing book arts and love reading and are writing, those are folks who love process like we do. They're engaged in these tedious things like weaving and spinning, you know, although we don't think about them as tedious. We see them as meditative. We see them as connecting with, you know, connecting our bodies with tactile materials and creating something really beautiful. It's very like-minded. And I think being in a space like that is really inspiring. And thinking about our programming specifically, you know, something we discovered in the archives recently were these amazing scrapbooks put together by our members in the 40s and 50s. And they were handmade books with hand-woven covers. You know, right there's an example of text and weaving coming together. We think about tapestry weaving. One of our board members who's a tapestry weaver mentioned how text often appears in tapestry. And that's incredibly hard to do. It takes practice to get good at including text in tapestry, but you know, there's synergy across our art forms. So it's not like we're moving into an auto dealership in their back room trying to teach weaving and spinning classes. We're moving in with a community of like-minded folks.
And I'm just going to make a couple comments from the chat that also speak to kind of those ideas of being in the building. One person to say, you know, Bethany Whitehead, who is the manager for Open Book. She says she's an excellent leader and organizer, and we'd be lucky to be working with her.
Absolutely.
One of the other comments kind of about that has to do with, you know, I like the idea of being attached to another artistic nonprofit. The opportunity to rent additional space at a reasonable rate plus great common areas would help a great deal. And then she got some dittos down there, which feels really good. another comment. I think being in a space where we would not be competing with the same courses or having that confusion about what organization offered the class might be better for us, is better for us. I'm gonna go back to a couple questions that have to specifically do with our programming. And let me address something else first. Sorry, I have my notes, but I'm not following them. Okay. You mentioned, walking into this amazing space, and I don't know, for anyone who's not in the building, you walk in through the front door, the MCBA bookstore and gallery is off to your left. There's a big interior space with some artwork. Off to the right is the second entrance to the bookstore, and also the coffee shop is right there. There's a big circular set of stairs. There's a set of open seating where I used to sit and study for my poetry classes. And then back in that corner, there's restrooms and an elevator, the freight elevator, which goes to all floors. And then there's also an entrance out to the back of the building for more parking. But when I think about that, I ask myself, how will people find us? Betsy, I bet you've thought about this.
Oh my
because I suspect that you want people to make it to our classes. And I'm guessing Paige has thought about this too, because she wants people to make it to our store. So, but Betsy, I will let you answer for both of you.
Okay, yes, Paige is furiously typing our closed caption, so I'm happy to take this one on. Thank you, Paige. So yeah, third floor space is really challenging. And you know what, on this call is Barbara Heath, who has been a Weavers Guild member for a long time. And she knows that before our Textile Center site, we were never located on the first floor, and yet folks managed to find us, including during the heyday of the Guild in the 1970s when we had over 700 members. And that was also pre-internet, which is pretty amazing that many folks found us. So yeah, wayfinding is something that we have talked about a lot in considering the space. Something that's really interesting about this space is that Open Book has part-time ambassadors. So these are folks who are paid to be in the atrium space of Open Book and greet folks as they come in, to invite them to go into other spaces and to direct them where they want to go. So we think about somebody who is there to represent all the organizations in the space, not just one or two, but every organization, and to really help people find where they want to go. Additionally, there's opportunity for us not just to hang signage that tells people where we are and lets them know that we're in the building. We would be included on a daily lobby card. So in the lobby, when you first walk in, there's a listing of all the events that are happening in the building. So we could include our classes on that lobby card, which would also say what floor we're on. In our communications on our website and our communications to students, we can do what we do now, which is point them to detailed directions of where to find us, where they can park, and a contact person to, for more questions about our location and how to get there. Also in the lobby or outside of the building, there's an opportunity to post an A-frame sign so that folks just walking around downtown, say they've gone to the farmer's market and now they're coming to Open Book to go to the Minnesota Center for Book Arts gift shop or the Milkweed bookstore, they can see our sign. It's right there on the sidewalk. We would have visibility right there. In terms of accessing our space, folks could be pointed to the elevator, and in the elevator we could have signage. When folks get off of the elevator, we would have signage right there pointing them in the direction of our space as well. Now, I will also say that if we were a knitting yarn store or a brewery or any number of spaces that have many locations across the Twin Cities, that we might be in trouble being up on the third floor. But as we all know as weavers, we are incredibly unique, not just within the Twin Cities and the region, but nationally. How many dedicated weaving supply stores and gathering spaces can you name in this country? How many are dedicated to weaving, spinning, and dyeing? I bet you can count them on two hands off the top of your head. And I think that is the thing that is in our favor. And I think that being in a space of our own, we will find that people confuse us less with the Textile Center because we really stand out from the other art forms that are in the building. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard students say, oh, I signed up for a Textile Center membership, thinking that the Weavers Guild and Textile Center were the same thing, that you were the weaving studio of Textile Center. Or I looked forever on the Textile Center website for weaving classes and didn't find anything because I didn't realize you were a separate organization. So I think, you know, when we think about wayfinding, we also have to think about what our community's current experiences. I know for our longtime members who have been with us since the time before we were at the Textile Center, you know that we're unique and we're separate. But for those who haven't been around that long, it's pretty confusing now.
I'm gonna throw up a couple more comments so that they are heard, and then sadly, because of my stamina, I'm going to kind of say this is like our 5-minute last call because I don't know what time we started comments, but I know it's been at least 15 minutes. So I'm just going to mention a couple of comments from the chat. One of them is that, you know, I know parking is essential for some guild members and their guests, but I also appreciate the consideration taken for those who would want to bike or take public transit. And I know it's not practical for transporting for equipment. It is an option for those using equipment at the guild or wanting to attend a meeting or buy some small supplies. Another comment that has to do with change, and that change is scary. And I think we can all kind of recognize that. I'm also going to mention a comment here about from an instructor because it's about thinking forward. She said, I was originally invited to teach with the Textile Center, but then they ended up turning down my curriculum, and being embraced by the Guild has been a wonderful experience. As you consider the new space, please consider how the facilitation might help live online programming. The folks at Vesterheim are doing a new build with this in mind, and I'm really excited to hear what they're doing to support virtual learning options. So while we think about virtual learning options and we think about our programming that we have now, let's say we moved. Betsy, what do you imagine for programming for the rest of the year?
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
It's such a no biggie, just a 5-second answer required here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I have way more in my hat than I could pull out in these 5 seconds, but I will say something I'm really excited about this space is its flexibility. It is the fact that we have those office spaces already built in, and we can think about one of those as a studio that is quiet, where instructors can pre-record class materials, where I can get on for Laura's class in the morning, and instead of having our shop storage behind me, worried that something's gonna fall on my head as I'm welcoming folks and helping troubleshoot tech stuff, it can be in a neutral environment. It can be in a space that's more professional. It can be in a space that's quiet and folks can hear me clearly and that I can hear people clearly. We can also think about hybrid classes. We're not there yet. Don't think we're going to start offering them tomorrow. But because we have the flexible space, we can think about what equipment we might need, what the space might need to look like in order for us to offer a class where people can tune in from their home in central Minnesota where they have their setup. And then folks who may not have a loom at home yet can be joining and participating on site. This space would offer us that flexibility, and that's really exciting.
And I'm sorry if I took notes for this real quick. When you think about programming for the rest of the year in terms of like actually how that would work, do you have a vision of, are you thinking about like what we do to close, move, manage?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not there yet, right? The first step is to be at this meeting.
Yep.
So we're not there yet, but I'm guessing, I'm just going to leave that. I'm going to plant that seed that's a big thing to think about.
Yeah.
I've got 2 questions here, unless we get a lot of feedback coming through. One of them, again, is just to reinforce the concern about parking in terms of open book programming. Is there like a shared calendar or something in which you'd be able to sort of gauge our events compared to theirs? I know at Textile Center, at least years ago when we both had a printed catalog, right? We would go through their catalog, figure out when classes started, figure out where Jackie was going to park her van to bring in Saori looms, and do a shuffle as needed. So when you know, have you just thinking about that and envisioning, what are you kind of thinking about?
Yeah, I would say it's no different than what we've got now. I mean, Textile Center is offering classes when we're offering classes, you know, and their classes, they have 10 folks. We have 4 to 6 folks, sometimes 8. And so, you know, I would continue doing what I'm doing now, which is to be thoughtful about, you know, and aware of the times that classes are being offered at other organizations. Like the Weavers Guild, the Minnesota Center for Book Arts is offering classes both online and in person. The Loft Literary Center is offering classes online and in person. They're finding that their online classes tend to go, but their in-person ones are not. So that's less competition for space or parking from that organization. I can also talk to the other programmers in the space and we can work together. There's a main building calendar where all the programming is tracked for the entire building. So that's another resource that we could look to. And, you know, like I said, I would keep doing what I'm doing now, which is a balance between thinking about when our instructors are available and what times work for them, when our students tend to be available and what times work for them, and then what else is going on, whether it be a game, a Gopher game, or Textile Center having a big event, you know, or something else happening nearby in the neighborhood. We're already doing that work now, and you know, it would continue in the new space. And I don't think that the increase in programming in the new space is going to be incredibly drastic relative to what we're seeing now. And you know, the parking lots are, you know, to scale, I think, as well. So we have an additional 12 spots plus dedicated parking for the Weavers Guild, you know, in the new space. I think that's adequate. Open Book is not offering classes for 40 people on the weekends, you know. They're similar to us in terms of their scale.
And I'm just going to apologize in advance to the comments and questions in the chat that I didn't get to. I am a speed reader, but I am not a speed scroller. So I'm just going to mention that right now. And while we think about wrapping up this meeting and, you know, where we're sitting today, Amanda, as the board chair, I want to ask you, in terms of thinking about next steps and how this might proceed or how it might look, you know, can you speak a little bit about that process?
Yeah, absolutely. And this also will respond to a couple other questions in the chat. So just a kind of a refresher on how the board operates. So members vote for board members and then in turn delegate the duties of running the guild. For that reason, you know, each one of the board members has a fiduciary duty to execute its duties in good faith and with the duty of care. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about what our space needs are based on feedback. We did put together a proposal that had a unanimous approval to engage with Open Book. If it turns out that this is, in our belief, in good faith, the best next step for the guild, then it would go back to the board for an approval for one of the board members, either the president or the president-elect, to sign a lease. So I just want to make sure folks kind of understand what the process looks like and know that, you know, the members have been deeply involved in the feedback that got us to where we're at, and I really appreciate your time. We should hear back from Open Book within the next week or two on next steps. And yes, there is another proposal on their desk, as I understand it. But as soon as we hear something, we will absolutely get back to our membership.
Yeah, I think I saw it in the email earlier today, and it was someone mentioning that, you know, there's an obligation to act on the best interests of the guild. And
Yes.
I just firmly believe that we never would have gotten this far. Speaking as not the moderator at the moment, but as a person at this meeting, I just don't think we would have gotten this far if there wasn't a community of people who really believed that this is the next step that the guild could take. And that as much as we have loved being in our current space, And as the longest staff member to have worked there, you know, it was my dream to work with textiles, and then I got the opportunity to work at the Guild after being turned down by the Textile Center. And, you know, and you have this amazing moment where you can shape the future of the Guild. So, you know, just coming from like kind of a personal moment, you know, I have this feeling of, you know, we were able to grow and professionalize and do so much. And where we are today is an amazing place. So wherever, you know, whatever the next step takes us, I'm just so excited that we're on this journey where we're willing to explore a dream. So
I agree. Thanks, Corinne.
In the follow-up to this, so as I've mentioned to everyone on this call, this meeting has been recorded and will be made publicly available on our YouTube channel. We do need a little bit of time to rendering to take out all my ums and ahs at the beginning, but we will then make it publicly available on our Guild channel so that all of our members will be able to tune in. I encourage you to share your thoughts with anyone else that you think of. As always, you are absolutely 100% welcome to email me. If you share your phone number and that you'd prefer call back, I am happy to call you back. That has been the case since it started, and I am happy to hear, I want to hear from you. So please let me know. And I know that's the case for all of our executive committee and our other staff as well, though Paige is too new, so be kind to her. The other thing I want to share is that we'll continue to update you through the draft. This is such a big topic that I just ask. My communications will not be perfect, but I will do the best that I can. And note that, as Betsy mentioned, we have requested to have a kind of just a very gentle open book walkthrough of the space before we sign anything, so that our members so that you'd have a chance to envision what it might be like to be there. And we'll share more details. We're waiting on them because, of course, you know, you hurry up and then you wait. So we're in that stage of the game right now. So again, and on behalf of the board and staff, I just want to thank everyone here for coming to this meeting and attending. I think it shows a lot of pride in our Guild that so many people are willing to give up on a nice Monday night to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, you
Thank-
guys. Great job.
Yeah, great job, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. I'm so excited about all this news. I think it all sounds great.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Oh yeah, I should have let everyone just unmute yourselves right now. If you're on the calls, unmute yourself and say whatever you want. Sorry.
Thanks for all the work you've put in.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks, everyone. This is exciting.
Sounds wonderful.
Awesome.
Can't
Thanks,
wait to
Kayla,
see
teacher.
it.
All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Cool.
Thanks.